BEERUN Beer Run. This episode, we have Pete back with you, and of course, we always got with us Chris. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing all right.
All right. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to look at a few things. The main thing is we're going to look at the alternate deployment. We're going to give our kind of feedback on that because I think we've been pretty active with using it as much as possible. We even ran a tournament with it. And we're also going to talk about Brewers Guild information. We're kind of working our way through the different guilds. I think a lot of podcasts talk about going through all the guilds, but few of them rarely get there. So we're going to kind of keep trucking. And then at the end of this, we're going to answer some questions that we had on Twitter and Facebook, just to see what you guys, or to give you guys our opinion on a lot of these different topics and questions you've been asking. So that's where we're going today. So getting started into it, Chris, do you just want to hop right into this discussion with alternate deployments? I think we might as well just hop right in.
Yeah. I've been advocating strongly for these alternate deployments for a while. I really like what these alternate deployments offer, specifically the fact that you start engaging in the action right on turn one. And I hear about some people advocating against these alternate deployments, and so we put up a poll on our Twitter, Rage Quit Wire, and I was happy to find out that even though I accidentally voted the wrong way on the poll,
we already said you're not that type of Asian.
I'm not. That the favorable side, the pro alternate deployment side, actually won out on that poll, because I was starting to think that most people were against this alternate deployment, and I was like questioning my sanity. Like, I really, really like it, and I was like, am I crazy? Like, what is everyone else seeing here?
Well, because our teammate for the American Team Championship we're going to, Jake, he asked me when I was like trying to get what guild he wanted to play. He was asking me what formations they were going to use, like which deployment. And when I told him they were using the standard deployment, he told me that was boring.
Well, that's because it is.
Okay, so do you want to explain why you think the standard deployment is boring in its current state?
Yes, the standard deployment is boring because every turn one ends up being the same thing for both players.
Okay, explain that a little bit.
You roll off and decide who's getting the ball, and the person that is getting the ball is trying to pass it back and forth and build some momentum, hopefully guaranteeing initiative in turn two. And then if they have the types of models that can do so, they set up a turn one goal at the end.
Okay, so as a Butchers player, why don't you tell me what your turn one looks like, since you say it's scripted. So what does your ideal turn one look like as a Butchers player?
An ideal turn one is that someone overextends a model and I get to take it.
Okay.
But typically what I'm looking at is me bringing up my models and slowly bringing them forward with measured distance to where I don't get engaged prematurely. And so I just think it's boring. Like, I don't like having to have the same...
Yeah, so my ideal turn one as a Brewers player is always the same. And I think you can look at this, and I've talked about this, I dropped it at least once so far, but the Pat Cat with the Brewers, that's when basically you have a couple of pieces that don't mean anything go first. So that's like a mash, and that's like maybe Hooper. You know, they're not going to get into the mix, so you just jog them. Then what you do is your important activations as a Brewer player in the standard deployment is you run Friday up. Scum gets to dodge his 6 inches because he has Come Here Scum. Then you activate Scum and you charge a model that is a little further out than it should be. And Scum has pushes because cats can push stuff around apparently. So Scum pushes that model closer, and hey, guess what? You got probably Tapper sitting there in the middle of the board because he kicked the ball off, and now he's going to be your last activation, build up a bunch of momentum, and then turn two, kill whatever model he was on, and you can go from there. That's the ideal Brewer turn one.
Yeah, it's just boring. Like, the alternate deployment in comparison means you get into the action right away. You're automatically within range to engage other models, and so even if you get the ball kicked to you, I know that I, for one, and others, don't necessarily go and get that ball right away, because if you're playing a team that's melee heavy, you're going to say, guess what? I'd rather go get engaged and start fighting right away. That's more fun than having to just balance across the other team, that they don't get too close, and that push-pull of playing chicken.
And initially I thought this was going to favor melee teams a lot. It definitely helps them, but after playing a bunch of games, I realized that you still have to be smart about it, because the first couple times we played it, obviously I'm going to put my bashers up front, so I put like Tapper and Hooper up there. And the first couple games I used it, I thought it was awesome, but then I noticed I was starting to overextend, and then it caused problems for the rest of my game. So even though it's good for melee teams to get that far up the pitch, I don't think it necessarily means it's overpowered, because you can easily, it's not that hard to drag Tapper into your whole team. He's easy to hit. After you get past his counterattack, it's way easy to get him in there, and then he's dead. And then he has to move his slow ass up the field with his 4-7 movement. So I think you're right. I think there's a lot of different tactics to it that people aren't necessarily giving the thought of.
Yeah, and the complaint that I heard, and you expressed that you'd seen other people articulate this online, is the idea that because of the way the game was set up initially, that when you use this alternate deployment, a more experienced player can make a hard counter against a less experienced player and just wipe them off the board really quickly. Is that basically what...
Yeah, I was, because we actually got into this topic because I was curious about whether other because I hadn't heard other podcasts really talk about the alt deployment. So I sent a tweet to the Guildball Tonight guys down in Florida, and one of them's up in Virginia. But I sent them a message, and I was like, "Hey, what do you guys think about this? I haven't heard you talk about it yet." And they spent probably about 30 minutes of their podcast talking about this question, and I thought it was interesting because both of them do not like it. One of the biggest things was they said that even a slightly better player is going to have a bigger advantage because they can take advantage of these quick engagements that they can set up and deploy to counter, to adjust to as necessary.
So my question is, when you brought this idea up, what I immediately thought is, well, do you know how miniatures games work?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how they work. Any rule in a miniatures game creates an advantage for a more experienced player, typically. That's the whole design of these.
And the argument wasn't necessarily that the person that is better is going to win, because if you have a good game, I think that's the way it should work. I think the argument was you had people at very similar levels, maybe somebody that was just a hair higher, and in their regular games, they would have really close games, but then when they played this alternate deployment, for some reason, the player that was a little bit better all of a sudden seemed like a world-class player that was just wiping them off the table.
Then it's not that they're a little bit better, it's that the old deployment allows somebody to slow play the shit out of you.
And it's not just that. I think also you have to be very smart where you put pieces. You can't just say, I'm going to put X model on the front line, Y model on the midline, and Z model on the back line. You actually have to think about it, because you don't want to put slow models on the back line because they'll take forever to get up the pitch. You don't want to put squishy models necessarily on the front line because you don't want them to die turn one.
So let's talk about a model, and this comes from one of the questions that we got asked from one of our listeners. His name is Jordan Walker, and he asked, how do you feel about Granite with the alternate deployment?
And I think this is what I like about the alternate deployment, is it gives life to models that I think would not see play otherwise. Like Granite, you're not going to see normally in a regular competitive scene. Some people will use her just because they like the model, because the model's amazing. Like, I think that's one of my favorite Masons models.
You're talking about the aesthetic of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But she's way too slow. She can't get in the mix quick enough. I mean, you're lucky if by turn 4 or 5 she's up where she's supposed to be. So I think this alternate deployment gives her life, because now you can deploy her on the front line and she's able to do what I think she was designed to do.
Yeah, I like that she can go up there and absorb a lot. And
well, she can get that gut and string going. There's a lot she can get.
That tar pit right in the middle of the board right away. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities with her, and especially for a model that doesn't have 2-inch reach and has the slowest movement stats around. Not literally, but a 3-5 movement is pretty sad. That's being able to move her up the board. That's a big incentive.
Yeah, I think other models will definitely benefit from that as well. Like Fangtooth, I mean, nobody brings him, but I think in this alternate deployment, mode you might. Benediction, he's another slow model. The Turtle benefits from this. He gets up the pitch and kind of, get going pretty quickly.
And I think that the one nice thing is if you take models like Granite or like Fangtooth, basically the temptation is going to be somebody puts them right in the middle of the board. I think that the more effective use for them is trying to shut down one side of the board.
Yeah, put them on like a flank.
Yeah, to where they're able to tar pit up and rough ground up that one side.
Agreed.
Either way, you're still not going to be able to do it with hunters and fish because of all the light-footedness, but
yeah,
that's just one great incentive to that alternate deployment is models that don't typically see the pitch. Another question that we got, and this is from Ben Rose. He asked.
Ben Rose is great, by the way. If you haven't heard or read any of his stuff or talked to him.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay.
So, but we've got a few questions from him. So obviously he's a pretty thoughtful guy, and I really like the questions he's asking, even though he was a bit of a smartass on our Facebook post. So, in Season 4, if the guild identity cards and the alternate deployment become a thing, do you think that they will make it as a mainstay in competitive play or become a feature in official tournaments?
So, and honestly, I think, and I know a lot of the old guard, a lot of the people who have been with this thing since the Kickstarter and even Season 1 or 2, I think that they're going to be a little hesitant about this because nerds don't like change. I mean, we like playing the game, we like breaking the game, we like getting used to how it works, and when things change, you have to adjust your game. You have to adjust what you bring, you have to adjust your tactics, the meta is going to change, and I think we are going to see this in competitive play, and I think it's going to work a lot like there was a lot of people on Twitter when I was talking about this afternoon. They were talking about different game systems and the different scenarios that they run. One guy was talking about Malifaux. There was another response that was talking about 40K and all the different deployments. And I think that's good for a game because once again, it unlocks different combinations you need. It unlocks different characters that are going to be better in different scenarios. So I think the different deployment is going to be maybe not this season, but I think Season 4 for sure. I think you'll see some kind of alt deployment for the competitive scene, and you're going to have to either the tournament organizer is going to have to decide hey, round 1 we're doing this deployment, round 2 we're doing the alt deployment, or it's going to be a roll-off thing, which I don't like the roll-off thing. I'd rather the organizer decide that round 1 is going to be standard, round 2 is going to be alt.
I would love to just see it be alternate deployment as the
just period.
Just that's what it is.
Okay.
That's how much I like it. I want to get into the action right away. I feel like the whole setup turn is completely unnecessary. You still get that experience of setting up your lines, except it happens when you're deploying instead of you having to waste an entire turn on it. And in the end, that means more time for in-game action. And I love that. As far as the guild identity cards, I do think that those are also going to come into tournament play and competitive play. But I don't want to see them be mandatory. There are a lot of situations where I see people playing these where if one person takes them, then the other person has to pick one. And unfortunately, with some guilds, I feel like their guild identity cards are almost a punishment because they're just not as good.
I think if you don't like them, all you would do is bring the one that heals you the most. You see what I'm saying?
I guess that's the case. There are many times where I'm just like, these are pointless. So if I would at least want to pick one that has an even heal rate. Most aren't going to heal you more. The majority are going to heal you less, or maybe get
if you look at the guild identity cards, the new standard's pretty much 3. Like, I think 3 is kind of like the average, and then the higher one's 4. So it's almost like they're lowering it down to 3, and 4 is the good heal rate now.
Great. I don't want to sacrifice the heal rate in many instances.
I don't think we'll talk too much about the guild identity cards, just because I think a lot of other podcasts have hit those up pretty well.
Yeah.
And honestly, I haven't played with them as much to give, I think, a thoughtful input about them. I think they're going to be good for the game, though.
Yeah.
I think it's very possible that there was somebody on, I think it was the Facebook feed, that asked about, making like the plot cards, making those part of regular rules. And I think that's having good foresight, because I think a lot of those plot cards might become just core rules in Season 4. And these guild identity cards might be something where you have those instead of the plot cards.
So, because
I think if you have, so here's the thing, I think if you have the plot cards, you have the guild identity cards, you have different pitch formations, I think at some point you're putting too much into it.
But there are some of these things that are in these plot cards that I don't want to be part of the standard rules.
That's what I'm saying, some of them. Other ones you would just eliminate.
I don't want somebody just being able to automatically
dodge 8 inches away.
Or re-roll kick scatters and those types of things.
I'm talking more like maybe wing back could become a thing. Like if you're a winger, and you're within 8 inches, you get that charge for 1 instead of 2.
So it's just a rule for wing players?
Yeah.
Or maybe Sickham's a thing?
Because I think that's a cool... I think that's something cool that's available. How they all have their different...
the one that I would like to
positions.
The one that I would like to see made a rule and just change it, that I think would not be detrimental, is man marking, where you're able to get +2 influence in the next maintenance phase when you take out an enemy captain.
Yeah.
You should get a bonus for taking out an enemy captain. That seems like...
Do you think influence or an extra victory point?
I think that you would see more wild swings if you made it a victory point, but influence seems reasonable. It's only 2 influence, so...
See, I almost like the victory points, because you would start to see people go like bloodthirsty for the captains.
Yeah, that would be fun. The other one that I think makes even more sense, but it's not one of the plot cards, is if it just boosted up more momentum.
Yeah.
I would love to see...
Getting extra momentum for taking out a captain.
Yeah, or if you're in a situation where you take out a captain in the maintenance phase, maybe you have the initiative, but you still get to start with momentum.
Okay.
Something like that where, clearly you have momentum on your side because you took out a captain, and that's a big deal.
So, let's go back to the alternate deployment for a minute, not to get too sidetracked with Twitter questions. And I kind of like how we're doing it mixed with the show with some of them. Some of the other random questions we'll get at the end, but the ones that fit with what we're talking about,
gotcha.
I like getting those right now. So, have you had any negative games with the alternate deployment?
No.
Not one?
No.
I think the only negative experience I've seen with it is with new players. Like when we ran that tournament, I was playing against, I don't think it mattered. I think I was playing against Matt. But Jeremy, who's our Morticians player, he was playing also a newer player. I can't remember who it was exactly, but I distinctly remember, it might have been Francisco. But anyways, Jeremy, distinctly, I remember him saying this, said, I'm just learning the rules, and now I got to learn this other deployment. And he expressed a little frustration with that, but I think over time it wouldn't bother a new player.
It wouldn't matter, because if the alternate deployment was just standardized and that was just what the deployment is, you wouldn't have any of these complaints. I mean, people complain because they're stuck in their ways and they're used to the traditional original deployment. But if it was reversed, if we had the alternate deployment as what came out in Season 1, And then they said, we're going to introduce this new deployment, and everyone's going to set up on the exact same line, and it's going to make the game go slower because turn 1 is going to be boring and just set up. People would flip out.
So let me ask you this, because you said this yesterday when we played a game. You said, this is boring as shit. We should have done the new deployment. You want to explain how that turn 1 kind of went?
Well, in this case, it was, and see, now you're just trying to bait me. I know what you're doing here.
I don't. Okay, so first off, we're not going to talk about farmers, but I just want.
But that's a part of it, right?
But that's who you're playing. So just tell me about the setup, though.
Yeah, and this could be true of any melee-oriented team. So this isn't a farmer's bash. But what happened was, I kicked off to you, and you got the ball, and you're a melee team, so you're not trying to score. You just kicked it around, thus gaining enough momentum to guarantee that you go first in turn 2, and then killed the ball in the back, and I had to come up towards you, so you tried to manage distance, and we went back and forth with that, but it was just boring.
Well, see, and so the thing is, it was the smart way to play for me because I had control of the pitch. I had the ball. Like, I could engage pretty much anytime I wanted to because you can use the ball to catapult into whatever you want to do, right? So it's one of those things where I like the standard setup. I like the alternate deployment. I like them both. But I was like, man, this is boring. I'm like, but he was playing Brewers. I didn't want to get into him quite yet. And I agree with you that the other one makes it more interesting quickly. And it poses questions more quickly that you have to deal with. Otherwise, you're going to have real life consequences.
There's just stuff to do. You just get to do stuff right away instead of feeling like you're.
Well, and I think you and I are both aggressive players, so we like it because it doesn't let your opponent bitch out right away.
Yeah, and that's another thing is, and I've said this before. I recognize that there are people that have a play style where they want to kind of stand back and play this kind of hit and run game, but for the most part, I think that creates a negative gameplay experience for a lot of people. Not to say that you shouldn't be able to play that way, that's not what I'm saying, but for most people, when they get into miniatures games of any kind, they're getting into those miniatures games and they're thinking, man, I want to be able to run these guys around the board and attack people and get engaged in the fight, not I want to stand back and hit and run like some of these, like the old deployment specifically, and some of the captains encourage you to do. That's fine if that's a play style that you're used to or that you're good at, but my point is, I think for most people, they don't want that experience where they just feel like their opponent is teasing them and continually running back.
Yeah, and I was talking with the guy that runs, or used to run, I should say, the Black Orifice, because it's not really something that rates guildball anymore. But they were talking about it gets rid of that, not gets rid of, but you can break that stalemate faster than you can in the standard deployment.
Yeah.
So I think that's generally our take on it. I think our group generally likes it too. I see a lot of people using it. We haven't had, like we said, we haven't had a lot of the negative play experience. I haven't seen a lot of blowouts with the new deployment. I mean, the guys up in Greenville seemed to like it as well. They used it for their whole tournament up in Greenville, the one that they ran, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
So they like it. I mean, and it's a different way to play, and I think that you might as well play it because I think, like you said, it's going to be somewhere in the future. It's going to be there.
Yeah, people just need to get used to it, and once they're used to it, I think that you will find that the majority would rather play it. And at least the small anecdotal example of our Twitter poll supported that, which I was actually kind of surprised with because I've just seen so many squeaky wheels that are getting the grease on their complaints about new alternate deployment. But I think most people prefer it.
So with that being said, I mean, I think that it breathes lives not just into players that you wouldn't normally bring, but it also breathes lives and helps out, I think, a lot of guilds that especially melee guilds, I think it's not a big advantage with the new deployment, but it definitely helps them get going sooner than later. And that kind of leads me into talking about the Brewers, because that's the guild we're going to look at today.
Yeah, so Pete's our Brewers player. He started playing the Brewers. I'm learning the Brewers as we go through our Escalation League. I guess we'll start with this question, and this is kind of fun. One of the questions that was asked to us on Facebook was by Christopher Schlegel, and he asked, "What beer do you pair with your Brewers?"
I think if I'm going to play my Brewers, I have to go with Guinness, just straight up. I feel like that's, if the Brewers are going to be getting drunk, it's off something that's, just a dark beer like that.
That fits the fluff. That's what
yeah.
You're saying. That's the old Jake's.
Yeah, like if you look at my pint pot beer tokens, there's at least two Guinness caps in there that I use for it.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really like is I think that if you're gonna play with beer tokens on pint pot, you need to play with actual beer caps.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So let's get into this. Give us a quick breakdown. What attracted you to the Brewers initially, and then what you like about their play style, and maybe a quick breakdown of the differences between taking Tapper or Esters, the two captains.
Well, I mean, the Brewers, what really attracted me to them is I have generally drifted towards melee, just anything that I've played, tabletop, video games, whatever. I tend to drift towards melee just because I find it, the imagery of it really attracts me. And then, I mean, I read the fluff about them being drunk Scotsmen pretty much, and I was just like, you know what, this sounds like something I can get behind. I also talked with you kind of about how they play, and you told me that they were a tankier melee, so I like the idea of a guild that can kind of hang around in a scrum. So that's really what got me into it. Plus then I started looking at the models, and the model that I just kind of drifted towards was MASH. MASH was like the first brewer model that I bought, and just something about that model, just that cricket bat and his eyes being covered by the helmet and being married to this big loving chick Esther's, just it was just something I was like, yeah, this is a cool guild. I can get behind this.
And what were some of the things that were pleasant surprises after you got into it? Things that you were like, yeah, this is what's going to keep me here.
So when I started playing them first, it didn't go great just because brewers are deceiving because they're slow. People are usually going to hit you or do something to you before you can initiate. So it was kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to work this out because they're slow, so I don't know, and they don't do a ton of damage. But where you start to see they do their damage is when you get everything clicking together. Like, obviously, commanding aura. You get everybody smashing face in that commanding aura, you're going to start just taking out models in one activation. You start getting different heroics up because brewers have more heroics than any other guild. That's going to start smashing people's faces. That's going to start extending your threat. That's going to start giving your opponent problems. So once I started figuring out the heroics, the auras, and then the knockdowns, I started to see the benefits of how brewers win games, because I tell people this all the time. If there's a knockdown model on the pitch, you better stand that sumbitch up, because if you don't, that model's not going to be there that next activation.
Yeah, I think that the Brewers can put together a very strong melee team. One of the, probably a number 2 melee team in.
Yeah, I'd say the only downfall of brewers that you have to work around and that takes a lot of practice is, well, 2 things. One is you gotta be good at managing your auras and your heroics. You get good with that, you'll start winning a lot of games of brewers. The second is you have to be careful of control teams, because they can start to jack up your scrum. Meaning, like, they can pull Tapper out, like Theron can, pin Tapper so he can only advance a certain way. There can be pushes that, like unexpected arrival that can push your whole scrum 4 inches apart. Next thing you know, you're split up and you're in a bad way. So I think those are the things that you gotta you got to play games to figure out how to get around those.
So you like Tapper as the melee basher list. What do you take in your Tapper list typically?
So my Tapper list is a little different. I've kind of actually adjusted it over time just because I've found a more effective way to play. When I first started off, it was always Tapper, a Scum, just because Scum gives tactical advice to Tapper, which I loved. Like, I don't even care about Scum. I hate cats. But I love the idea of a drunk listening to a cat to get advice on what to do on the pitch. That was awesome. So, Scum, I always brought Hooper. Hooper and Tapper should always go together. They wreck just everything. I always brought Mash. Spigot was always there. And I usually would bring either Stoker or Pint Pot because I started in Season 3. But then I started getting back on... Friday got on my good list again. So I started bringing Friday instead of Stoker just because I like having that 1 or 2 goals when I need it. And I found that helped me win more games and I didn't need as many takeouts. So I started bringing Friday just to help me out with that scoring. So That's my Tapper list right now is usually the traditional one. It's Friday, Scum, Tapper, Spigot, Mash, and Hooper.
And you follow the metas more closely. Overall, do you find that most people run Tapper? Is that the majority of...
It's really weird right now because I would say yes, but there's this weird counterculture going on right now. And people are, because they follow the Germans, like the Germans since they won the WTC.
And Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
Like, so, in theme.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things where one of the better players in Germany is starting to play Esters. So everybody's like, oh, he's playing Esters. Let's check this out real quick. And I thought that was stupid. I hate it when people, follow like sheep, and just like, oh, this good player's playing this. I got to try it out. And that's great, but yeah, people play Tapper.
I agree with that. There are definitely times where I felt in general like I've expressed an opinion, even on this podcast, and very strongly the population that is listening in or the other players that I talk to disagree with it to the point where I have specific reasons and I'm committed to the idea and have thought through the idea that I'm expressing, but it's almost made me think, am I a little bit crazy or insane that like I think this and everyone else tends to go the other way?
Yeah.
And then you have moments where you feel really vindicated because something happens, at a world championship or some interview gets released with a player that is very successful. But I think that it's wise to try to find your own way. I don't think that a lot of people play that list that you described. There are a lot of people that don't like MASH. They don't see MASH's value. And so I know that you've surprised players in various tournaments with him and what he can do.
Yeah, so we went to, and I'll share this story real quick. We went to the Carolina Team Championship. That was, back in the spring, and it was fun. It was Chris, myself, and Brandon, and he was playing as engineers. You were playing.
He's the pundit in Myrtle Beach.
Yep, and you were playing Butchers. I was playing Brewers, of course, because that's my bae. So it was really funny though. I was playing an Alchemist player, and I dropped Esters, and that threw him off because he's like, I don't even know what Esters does, and I was like, well, that's great because I love her. So she messed him up pretty good. And then I brought Mash, and he's like, Mash is the only brewer that I don't own. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And he went on to waste probably about 8 influence throughout the entire game because he kept messing up and triggering unpredictable movement off Mash. I kept counterattacking with Mash and getting a couple of how's that on him, so that pushed him 4 inches away. So Midas, Catalyst, and a bunch of other people wasted a bunch of influence because Mash screwed him out of it. And I loved it, every minute of it. And at the end of the game, he's like, I think I need to pick Mash up. And I'm like, you want to know what? You probably do.
Yeah, the Mash has clearly been your MVP over the time that you've been playing that. I think that for those that don't like Mash, he is well suited to be a piece that can change a game, especially when he has the ball.
Yeah, so let me talk about Mash a little bit. And he's not a stranger to a lot of metas. A lot of people know about him because he is good. So if you get somebody who really knows their brewers, they're going to like MASH just because you can put the ball on him. He's actually a really good scorer. He's actually a striker, even though he's a big fat guy. And he's pretty good at it. So he can get you that late game goal, which I've used him for. He also can waste people's influence like I just described. He's good for pushing people off the board. If somebody gets too close to that board edge and you're there, give him a quick how's that. I've also used him just for crowd outs. I've used him to knock people down. I think one game you and I played, I think he kept Filet occupied for 3 turns.
Yeah.
Which was annoying for you.
Yeah.
So he's just really good. He only has a 4-column playbook. So, I mean, it's a really short wrap, really easy to get knockdowns. He's not damaged, though. I think a lot of people see him as a big guy, and they're like, oh, sweet, here comes some damage.
Some bruiser.
No, he's a position guy. He's going to push people where you want him. He's going to knock people down. He's going to get people away. But he's not going to do a lot of damage unless you're going to do it with the non-momentum.
And the big thing with him is that unpredictable movement. You just don't expect it from his fat ass.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so, yeah, you've definitely surprised some people with him. When we were helping, I got into guildball a while before Pete and then got Pete into it. So when we sat down, a lot of the learning games that I was doing with Pete, we were trying to craft a list that would be successful for him. And unfortunately for me and my butchers, we crafted a tapper list that I think is better in Melee than the butchers. At least very competitive with them. But I personally think they're actually a little bit better. So I regret being so helpful to you. And I will tell you that there were so many times early on where I made the mistake of going into MASH with a 1-inch Melee butcher, and he unpredictable movement out, and I cussed and sweared, and it was frustrating.
It's because he also has a 2-inch reach, so people forget that it's his melee zone. So when you go even to your 2-inch reach, he's going to dodge 2 inches out.
Another good example of why one of the briskets should have a 2-inch reach.
Yeah, get out of here. We're not talking about that.
I'm just saying, she has a big stick, man.
This little girl.
So, anyway, so that's your tapper list. That's your bread and butter. Let's talk about your esters list. And what I specifically want to ask you about is, tell us about the experience that you had at that team championship when you played another Brewers player and you decided not to drop Tapper even though you know he was going to be playing a melee heavy list.
Yeah.
You decided to drop Esters, and tell us why you did that and how it kind of played out in that game.
So I like Esther's a lot. I've played her for a long time. I've surprised our meta. Our meta probably knows her pretty well because I play her a bit. So people like to get on her because she has a 1-inch reach. She's a big fat lady that only moves like 4'6", and they say she can't put out a lot of damage. But she only has a 4-column playbook. You can give her +1 damage every turn to her playbook. You can also, there's ways to get her tack up. I usually bring Quaff with her. Sometimes I'll bring Scum, but Quaff gives her +1 tack. I like doing that. Also crowd outs, you bring like Cooper to get that 2-inch reach crowd, or gang ups, I mean. So it's 4 wide. She can wrap pretty easy. And she has 3 damage at the 4th column, so that's 4 damage if she has
if she
strength.
Sings, yeah.
If she has the strength singing. And you can tool her up so you can give her +2 damage. So, I mean, that's 5 damage on the top, and she's probably going to wrap. So she does a lot of damage, and I like her. Plus, she can do damage from far away. So I like her a lot. But the game that I dropped her in at that team tournament, we were kind of jockeying for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place. So we weren't going to get first because we had a bad first round. But we could get 2nd if we played really well in that last round. So it was a mirror match. I was playing against another Brewer player. So, Chris, when you play against a Brewer player, what are they probably going to drop?
They're probably going to drop a melee list.
And who's going to be the captain?
Yep.
Tapper. So I knew this guy was going to drop Tapper. So if I drop Tapper, I'm like, I don't know who this guy is. But if we're equal players, that means it's going to come down to dice rolls. And I don't want to leave it up to dice rolls. So what I did is I decided to go with a striking team. So I brought Esther's, I brought Mash, I actually think I brought Scum just to put the ball on if I wanted to. Friday, I brought Spigot 2, so I brought Vet Spigot. And I think I brought Stoker as well just to get some range in there. And basically my idea was I'm going to try to get 2 goals, 2 takeouts, and maybe I can give up a goal and still win the game. And maybe I can control the ball so that way, I win by scoring goals and not takeouts. And it pretty much worked the way I wanted it to work. I mean, Esther's kind of held her own in the pitch because she's a tough gal. She has a lot of boxes. Besides now Grange, she has the most boxes for a captain.
Okay.
And I was able to crank out 2 goals. I think I got 1 takeout, and then we clocked. And I was up on time, so he started giving up points first. And we were just fighting over the ball, and I ended up winning because we were on time.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is there have been times where you've gotten a little bit too cute with it, and you've tried to drop Esther's and it didn't work out for you, and you, in retrospect, said no, it was time for Tapper. So what's the hint as far as when you know that it's time for Esther's versus Tapper?
So I mean, first off, if there's a lot of conditions, you probably want Esther's just because she helps you clear them, because she has I think it's a 3-inch AOE or a 3-inch pulse that lets her get rid of conditions. So you want to bring her against Alchemist. That's why she was good against Brewers, because I could just clear down those knockdowns. So that helps. I think anybody who, like I said, a mirror match, I think she's really good into with Brewers. And anything with a lot of 1-inch reach she can be good into. You start getting into a lot of 2-inch reach models, you probably want to bring Tapper. Just because he's going to help kind of work your way through that. So yeah, I think you just got to kind of feel your way out when it comes to Esther's. I dropped her into Masons, which I thought it would have been a good idea, but it was against Brian White. So I should have just played my strong list that I was more comfortable with. And I did surprise him, and I got a couple things to work, but he's just a little better player than me. The guy knows what he's doing, and I played a list that was a little weaker into Masons than Tapper would have been.
Okay. So
it's just recognizing the better matchup.
Okay. So give us an example of an Esther's list. Did you do that yet?
Yeah, I got, like I said, I think the one that I dropped the most is Esther's. I like bringing Quaff. A lot of people don't, but I like Second Wind just to bring Esther's back if I need to, if I feel like she's too far out. I also like giving +1 tack to her, so that makes her tack 6. The dog surprisingly can get a lot of momentum when he actually does something, like if you have Sikkim. The dog only has a 2-wide playbook with 3 tacks, so the dog can get quite a bit of momentum for you, and he's a love creature.
I'm sure you take Mash with her.
Yeah. Oh, Mash is definitely, because he gets the +1 armor boost just for being next to her. So you can bring either of the mascots, though. I've done both. Friday, she's good with her. I usually bring Cooper just for the 2-inch reach. Spigot's almost a mainstay. Spigot 1, he's just too good. And like I said, Stoker goes really well with her because you can set somebody on fire with Esther's, and he automatically gets +1 damage against that model.
Okay.
Because they're on fire.
So Ben Rose also asked 2 more questions related to the Brewers, and he asked one about Stave, who you haven't mentioned yet, and he asked, in which matchups would you take Stave? So what are the situations where you think Stave... Because I think a lot of people don't really like taking Stave because he's a 2 defense, no armor. He's a fat ass that's easy to farm.
Yeah, so you can farm him easy. He only has 23 boxes. He has tough hides. That helps, I guess. Here's the thing I don't like about him the most. He can be slow. He can be a 2-0. I'm good with that. Like, sure. Sign me up, buddy. You can still be on my team. The problem is he's a 1-3 influence. So you're sacrificing 1 influence to bring this guy. And when you do his character play, which is why you're going to bring him, you don't get any momentum for it. So he's almost got 2 strikes right there. And the 3rd strike is he's a big vet, slow guy. So where you bring him, though, because he's going to be on my 10-man list, and I'm going to tell you why. 1, because he's great at busting up teams that like formation. So he's good at busting up those Ox lists. He's good at busting up other brewer lists. He's good against farmers about busting up Grange's little melee squad. Who else? Rage with his, aura. So if Rage sets up, you can just, and does his bloody coin, you can just throw Lava Barrel, break that up, and now he's not getting the +1/+1 for it. So Stave definitely has his matchups, but it's usually against melee teams that like being in certain formations with each other to get benefits like Commanding Aura or Honest Labor.
Okay. And then the second question he asked, and this will be the last one that we discuss as it relates to this Brewers discussion, is if Veteran Decimate went to the Brewers in this Union and Chains event, what would you like her to bring to the team? What could she bring that you don't already have?
So Decimate, the biggest thing that I want to carry over is that she is, I still want her to be as quick as she is, because that would be awesome. A 6'9" model. Brewers don't have any of that. So if she was a 6'9" underneath times called, that would make her a 8'11" model.
Okay.
That would be cool. And then the second part that I think Brewers really need is anatomical precision. We don't have a model that deals with armor, so I think that would be really good to bring that to the guild. So if I could only have one of those two things, I would want the anatomical precision. But if she goes, I think she would go to 6'8" if she was a brewer. I don't think she'd stay 6'9".
Yeah, she only has the 1-inch reach, fortunately.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the great things that the Brewers have is all that 2-inch reach.
Yeah.
And so in some ways I see that there's a cost to her being there. I don't think that, and granted we haven't seen any cards for these potential ads.
We won't see any of them probably till the spring.
Yeah, but I don't imagine that she's going to be some auto include.
Yeah.
I think that she might add a little bit more dimension to the team.
Yeah, I think she could bring some really neat things. I think she might be more of a. She's kind of like in the range. If she stays the way she is now, it could be a liability just because she only has 14 hit boxes. So it's kind of like Spigot. How if you can get Spigot, you want to kill him because he's squishy or she's squishy.
And you must be thrilled with the new sculpt on her.
I mean, it looks good. I mean, I think the other one looked fine too, but this one looks just as good.
The other one I've heard two people referring to it as the Ronda Rousey model because she was so buff.
Oh. Yeah, I could see that. So it's just, and I think the last question that I want to make sure we hit up with the Brewers is that somebody asked, can the Brewers be competitive in the tournament scene? And the answer is definitely yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I know that some people, they don't believe that because I don't think you've seen the Brewers win any of the big tournaments. And that does tell you that they're challenging, which I like. But they're still good. So you can still get them to work the way they're going to work. The problem is most people know what the Brewers do. So the key is how can you get them to do what you want when the opponent knows what you're trying to do. And that's part of the trick of playing Brewers where, you just got to tempt them just enough to come get a piece of somebody. And then hopefully that person had enough hitboxes on them, and then you can make them pay for coming into you.
Yeah. And so that kind of wraps up our discussion on these Brewers. What other things do we want to hit on?
Let me check, just make sure I didn't miss anything with the Brewers. Because, we don't, like I said, you guys can ask individual questions about models like the Stave model if you have more questions about them. One model that we didn't talk about, but I think I'm going to try experimenting more with is Lucky. I think he has a place in a Brewers lineup. I just don't know what that place is yet.
Yeah. I don't think that with those Brewers that there's a lot of incentive to take Union models. I think that they're a pretty self-contained guild where they kind of have everything they need within the context of how they're going to play based on their captains.
The only model I brought was Harry the Hat before he got nerfed just because of how good he was, and he was a 2-inch reach model. Once he got nerfed, I took him out just because I felt like you're getting penalized for bringing a Union model. You don't get the benefit from Commanding Aura. You don't get the benefit of just any of the heroics. So yeah, Brewers are one of the guilds where it makes sense not to bring Union.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Anyone where they're giving out specific bonuses to their friendly guild models.
Yeah, because like old Jake, you can't give that to Harry, or you can't give it to Avarice and Greed.
And it's the same with Grange, and it's the same with Ox, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
Right? Like, there's a lot of guilds that I think are designed where they're better self-contained instead of taking the potential addition of the Union models.
All right, so we'll go ahead and, because like we said, we like to keep it right around 45, no more than an hour on our podcast. So you want to do like a quick fire, like questions from the people of the Facebook and Twitter world?
Sure, hit me.
So looking at what we have first, and I got to apologize because it just cleared off my phone. Do you have a question on yours that you want to ask real quick?
Okay, so here's one.
Okay.
If you could have a player from another guild and switch it to your favorite guild, who would it be? So first of all, who's your favorite guild now? Are you still a Brewers man or are you a farmer?
Listen, I like these farmers a lot, but the Brew Crew all the way.
Okay, so you could add a player that isn't currently a Brewer. Who would you add to the Brewers? As they currently exist, not with all sorts of crazy additions, but they become a Brewer, so they get commanding aura and all that stuff.
I would like to see that fun-loving guy Flint on the Brewers team.
Oh, so you want more scoring?
I want more scoring. I want that close control. 4-1 charm mailed. Sign him up for the Brewers. I'll take it every day.
The two that I would want to see for my Butchers are, and it could be either one, but the reason basically becomes the same, is I would love to see Grayscales or Mash. Because they've got that 2-inch reach, and they've got that unpredictable movement, and under Ox's auras, they would hit hard.
Okay. So I like this question from Michael Klein, and this one goes right to you.
And by the way, that question was from Peter O'Sullivan.
Okay.
So
this one, and I like that question. I love those kinds of questions. But Michael Klein asked, and this is the guy that called me out with my farmer skills, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other at the ATC. So Michael Klein said, okay, what do you think is causing your weakness against the farmers?
And then I saw that somebody included, to make it more difficult, balance. The biggest thing is their healing.
Okay.
I feel like I have to waste a ton of activations getting to kill models that should be a lot easier to kill. Specifically ones that I think are MVPs, like Tater.
Yeah.
Tater heals so much with Harrow in that lineup.
You brought Tater down to 5 hit points the other day, and he activated and healed himself basically up to... Let's see here, that's 6, so that's 9, so that was up to 13.
Yeah, and then you can take the guild identity cards. The bottom line is they need to do something about that, and I'm not going to turn this into another rant.
I think another weakness, because I want to answer the question too, is I think it's also guild matchup. I think other melee teams are going to have trouble with the farmers for a little bit until they can figure out, like, hey, Stave's a good idea, or Pint Pot's a good idea, like to counter Windle. So until they can get used to some of that tech, I think they're going to struggle. But those control teams, I think if you played with some of those, you would have more success, I think. Okay, you got another one?
I don't really.
Okay.
There are a couple others here that are specifically about like the hunters, but I think we'll have another discussion about the hunters where we can get to those later.
Yeah, so I mean, somebody said, we can answer this real quick from Dan White. So, because you're an Ox player, so when do you take Meat Hook?
I almost always take her.
Okay, so
I like her more than Boiler because she's got the same movement, and I like that she has a better kick.
Okay.
And so having a 3 kick in there, in the end, her threat isn't terrible. Like, she has a 3-6 kick, and then she's a 6-8 movement, so it's not like she's awful. And she does present a potential scoring threat. I don't really feel like... I feel like you get to keep more melee potential and more damage output, which is what you generally want to do with the Butchers anyway. And you don't really lose a lot off of somebody like Brisket, who is a better scorer, no doubt. But I think that Meat Hook can surprise you here and there. And Hooked and Bleed and all that kind of stuff is great, even if you go with Fillet.
So last question, and I'm going to ask this one to myself because I have the know-how of this one and you don't.
Oh, let's hear this.
Okay. I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna say 2 questions. So I'm ask and answer my question second. I'm gonna ask you this one first. Chris, have you beat the farmers?
I have, just not when they're played properly. Now, I haven't beat your farmers, but I've beaten them. They're beatable if somebody plays incorrectly.
So, and I'll say this, I've lost 1 game with the farmers, and that was against a Corsair list. So I am going to have Chris try out the Corsair list against me, just so you can see that there are some problems that the farmers do have. So, and we'll see how that goes, and maybe we'll do a battle report on that one, because I think that'd be fun.
That probably would be, although I'm hardly a skilled fish player. So
well, maybe we'll church you up a little bit here, get you used to them. So, last question, this is what I'm going to ask myself. So, have you got the other episodes on iTunes yet? So the way that we're going through the recording process, folks, is first thing is when I get done with this, I usually edit it the same night, just because I'm one of those guys where I want to get it out there for people to listen to. That way it's real time, content. So I edit it. I put it on YouTube first because that's the quickest thing I can get up on the internet. So some people like YouTube, some people don't. That's fine. Second thing I do is I send it to our international department, and he puts it on our website, which is the Holy City Arsenal our info page. Check that out if you haven't. It's linked on my Twitter page at
and it's Holy City Arsenal
.info, I think.
.info, okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's where we're putting up the podcast. We also got it on podcast.com, which Juan also puts it up. I always feed those links out as soon as he puts it up. So the YouTube comes up almost the night we record it. The podcast stuff usually gets put up the next day. And once this iTunes thing gets ironed out, it'll get put up on that 3rd. Because I've had a lot of people asking about iTunes, and it's coming. I asked, I think it was Hall Legends. They're a pretty big guildball group. I was like, hey, if we have it as, if we have not a lot, but if we swear in our podcast, is that going to hold things up a bit? He's like, I think mine took about 2 weeks, so just kind of hang in there. So it's going to get on iTunes. It's just one of those things where until it gets approved, that it's just going to take time. It's been 10 days, though, so it should be this week, I would hope.
We hope. But we're not changing the swearing category.
Well, no, I mean, just because...
Because fuck them, that's why.
It's going to be like that, I guess. So, you got anything to add?
No, that's it.
Okay, so there's only a few things that I want to add. First, there's a couple events coming up that I want to share. So we didn't get into Union and Chains. I think we'll maybe discuss that more next week. I think everybody's talked about the sculpts. We're just, I think that's already been
played out.
About.
Yep.
We like the models, though. They're cool.
They are.
The story's coming along. Story, I don't know if Harry got his time in the sun, but whatever. So the events coming up, this is specifically at the Final Round Game Shop. There's the WizKids Open for HeroClix is coming up. That's November 18th. There's also a Dice Masters WizKid Open at the Final Round Game Shop in Somerville, and that's November 11th. So if you're a WizKids person, you like Dice Masters or HeroClix, check those out. And then SteamCon's coming up.
Yeah, it is.
The US one is going to be the 1st through the 3rd. So get excited about that. Hopefully we'll get some cool reveals for what's coming up this next year.
I want them to release some limited edition stuff. Like I like that Rage Bus that they did at, was it Gen Con?
Yeah.
And I want more of that kind of stuff.
Cool. Yeah, and I think Steamforge is expanding that way, which I think a lot of people are excited about. So I got a lot of people going to SteamCon. I talked to a couple people. Our Greenville guys are going to SteamCon.
Yep, they are.
We're going to help tune them up for some of the events they're going to be playing in. But I got a couple people on the internet. Guildball Gamers, the big guy that I talk with him. I tweet with him. I like his blog he does on YouTube. He's going to be at the UK one, so I'm going to be following him while he's going through that. And he gets into some cool stuff. Like he'll get into some like those press things, like where he's sitting there while they're talking about all the cards and stuff that they're coming out with. So he gets to see some cool stuff. And then, so that's coming up. I think December 9th at the Final Round in Somerville, we're going to do our Blacksmith release event.
Yep.
So that's going to be cool. Come get some of those anvil balls that you can kick around, apparently.
Yeah, Hurt the feet.
There's also cool cards with that kit. So yeah, come check that out. We'll put that up on the page pretty soon here. And then finally, the last thing that I'm going to say is that there's going to be the first, and this hopefully will be an annual thing. It's called the Battle Balls Guild Ball Tournament. This is going to take place at Battlegrounds, and that's in Dalton, Georgia. I don't know if you remember Bill from the Atlanta tournament we went to. He's from Tennessee with his son.
Yes.
So he's going to be hosting that tournament, and I told him that we'll bring some people down and we'll check that out. It's not too far away. So we're gonna go to that, and hopefully he's gonna get some cool sponsors for that.
Yeah.
I hooked him up with some info today.
Yeah. By the way, once again, we want to give a shout out to our great sponsor, Final Round. They provide so much for us, both in the battle reports that we've already posted, a couple old ones on there, and also for this podcast, sponsoring us with this great Snowball microphone.
Yeah, I got 2 more battle reports I'm going to put up this week. They were from the tournament we ran early summer. A couple of the Greenville guys came down, and we got some good games on camera with
Oh, and there's one more thing we have to talk about. And you mentioned it earlier, but the last podcast we didn't talk about who our third is for that American Team Championship.
Oh.
So why don't you
reveal?
You already mentioned Jake, but go ahead and tell.
So our third player is going to be Jake Smith from the Greenville group. He agreed to be our third. We're going to go up. We're going to get some good games in. Hopefully get some knowledge. Anytime you play a new meta, I think you got to be open to some new things that you haven't seen before.
Did you have to give him the Rick Pitino treatment?
Listen, because I want to keep our sponsorship, because he provides us with the means to recruit, I'm not going to comment on that.
Oh, okay, all right.
So, I think that's a wrap, man, unless you got anything else, Chris.
That's it. I'm out.
All right, so check out our Twitter, guildball, Rage Quit Wire, there we go. The old Twitter machine. Check us out on Facebook. We're both on there, especially on the Guildball supporter site, and we're out.